I want to reiterate John's note to everyone who's online watching us. If you've got questions, please ask me. I'll probably say a couple of things here that might be a little surprising to you in terms of your knowledge. So if it is, get back to me as quickly as you wish. And I can be done online. We can do it through the church, the website, with the elders, etc. So our lesson will be from Joshua, the 5th and 6th chapter. And it is regarding Jericho. Our VPS and our training as we go through the church studies tend to emphasize the aspect of the children and learning, and we remember those things. That's good, but as adults, we tend not to get into the depth that we need to do if we've had some of the lessons we've had in VBS or some of our classes. For example, the walls of Jericho comes falling down. There's a song about that. I won't sing it for you. We're not going to turn off the system. And it almost minimizes the effect of Jericho. And we can't do that. It's a serious issue if we do, for all kinds of reasons, because least of which, or mostly, we have Jerichos in our lives. We have the walls of Jericho. And I'll try to point some of those out. But Joshua was facing some of those. As he took over with Moses' death that takes place, I'm reminded of Truman President Truman, when he became president. He made a comment to the rest of the group, because he wasn't really involved at that point in time in the presidency. He really wasn't notified. He didn't know anything about the atom bomb or anything when he took over. And of course, that's April of 45 for some of you that didn't know that. And he said something along the lines, it felt like that the stars and the moon and the planets had fell on him, that he just wasn't ready for it. I can imagine Joshua feeling somewhat the same way. Here was a leader that they'd had for 40 plus years that he was involved with Moses. And he suddenly says, I'm in charge now. And God says to him, yeah, but I'm going to be with you. And that's nice, God. But, I'm still in charge, and I'm really concerned about this. And so they go across Jordan in the first few chapters, and they get across remarkably. Jordan River is spread apart. Reminds them of the Red Sea stories, where God had opened that up, where Jordan was opened up. Now, Jordan's not the size of the Red Sea. I've been on it. It's pretty minimal in that case. But just walking across it would not have been a simple thing to do for a gazillion people. And they had a lot of it, probably a couple million, something like that. So that gives them the image that God wanted him to have. Walking through there, it says, as Moses walked with the people out of Egypt. But Joshua gets over there, and he knows that the first encounter that he's going to have is Jericho. It's right after you pass up go across the river, and Jericho's walls were formidable. And not only that, it had an unbelievable history. It's probably one of our oldest cities that was inhabited, period. At least 10,000 years old. And the walls were somewhere around 8 feet thick. That's thick. 15, 12 feet high. And there were a double one. It went around twice. It was concentric. It was a formidable location to try to attack. And Joshua, and you'll find it in the 13th verse of chapter 5, Joshua was out looking at this place. I can imagine he's trying to figure out what his plan is going to be. How am I going to attack this? I mean, he had a decent army. As I said, a couple million people, at least 40, 50,000 soldiers that we can count on. But they weren't trained to take on walls. They're trained a desert fight. And they'd had a couple of those. They were successful with that. Of course, God was with them, but they were still successful. They were used to that kind of a thing. But attacking walls, having catapults that would smash in gates, not so much. They didn't really have that kind of training. And these walls weren't just going to crumble. These were massive walls, well built. They had a citadel outside of it that you could see that was some 20 to 30 feet high. It was a massive location. It wasn't simple. It wasn't a huge city. We're guessing it was probably, half 3 or 4 acres, something like that, mile and a half around. So it wasn't that big in that sense, but formidable, very formidable. And so I can see Jericho going out there and say, I got an army, and what am I going to do with it? And then he runs into somebody in the 13th verse, chapter 5. But I'll get back to that. Let's begin with where he was at. How did he get his army ready? When you're in the service, you're trained to do things, and you go over the plan over and over again. When I was jumping, we had to do a gazillion parachute training jumps without the parachutes first, not out of planes. They were 3 foot high, and they had a tower that they dropped us out of. But the 3 foot one, I can't even tell you how many times I went over and over and over again. First time I ever jumped out of that plane, I dropped out. I was on the ground. I was picking my chute up, and I looked up, and I realized I had jumped out of the plane because I see the plane going off. But as far as everything in between, I didn't really remember that. So it was just going through the basics of training. After that, I thought it was neat. And I remembered, I know I'm different, but I remembered every part of it. But the training of an army is very important. They get used to the methodology. They get used to what everyone should be doing. They get used to movement. They get used to, and all of that. And so I can imagine, again, what he was going to do here and get his army ready. But God said he had another plan. He had another plan. And what was it? Did he make them get their spears ready so they could throw them faster? Were their axes more effective? Did they sharpen them up? Did they do any of those things? No. No. The first thing they do in the 5th chapter is that they have the people, the men, circumcised. That's an odd thing to do. Not only is it painful, I suppose, I more than suppose, especially for soldiers at this point. It wasn't done in birth. It was done with soldiers. They weren't going to be moving around a lot. This is in enemy territory, and you take your army, and they're not going to be moving around a lot. They're not going to be facing anyone effectively. They, in effect, are going to have some real serious difficulties. But God said, that's what we want to do. And he says, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to circumcise the soldiers. And so they do that. And so now are they ready? Well, they wait a few days for everybody to get healthy, by the way. Now, they've scared the Canaanites somewhat, and we see that in the first verse. They're petrified. They get into their forts, and in this case Jericho, close up the gate and says, let's not get anybody out of here. We're going to be protected that way. And Rahab said the same thing. They were petrified. You came across Jordan and no issue whatsoever. And so rather than fighting them out there, they were willing for them to try to break down the gates, knowing that they couldn't do that, or at least that was the thought process. So what was it? What else did they do? They ended up taking the Passover. They couldn't take the Passover and not be circumcised, so they were circumcised and they took the Passover. What kind of illusions did that give them? It goes back to Exodus in the 12th chapter in terms of taking the Passover. It was God wanted them as a friend, as a part of them, as a part of his army, if you will. And that's an important point. It wasn't Joshua's army, it was God's army. And so you see the people that coming out of Egypt that has had the Passover, that were circumcised, that were part of God's people, and they turn away from him. They decide that he can't accomplish what he's told them that he was going to do. He sent out some 12 spies. Joshua was one of them. Caleb was the other. And they come back and tell them, says, we can't do this. And they said, yeah, we can't do this. Joshua and Caleb, of course, are a little different. We can do it. We got God's help. Yeah, they're big guys, but we can do it. The people turned away from God. Now, this passage in the 5th chapter, I'll just tell you, my Hebrew's not great, but it is a little bit of a play on words. You were once enemies, and now you are my people. That's really what that's trying to say there in Hebrew. In the 5th chapter. And why? Because the people had left God at one point, even though they were circumcised, even though they'd had the Passover, they had turned off from God. And so in order to get the people back with him, they end up being circumcised and taking the Passover. They are now God's people. They are now committed as God's army. They're now ready, if you will. And so Joseph, I'm losing my brains here. Joshua looks at it and says, yeah, I think they're ready. And he wanders out and he looks at Jericho. 13th verse. I can't imagine what's going through his mind. I can imagine what would go through mine. That's an awfully big wall. That's a horrible wall. And I don't have too many battering arms out there ready to do this. I got a decent army, but I don't have too much. So I'm going out there and take a long, hard look at this. I'm going to visualize what's going on. When we were trained to do different missions, one of the things we would do was being able to view what we were going to attack, what we were going to do. We even practiced it within in a facility that even looked like what we were going to attack. Joshua was looking at this thing, and he hadn't practiced taking Jericho. But who does he run into? 13th verse. Crucial verse. I want to read that. Joshua was near Jericho. He looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" That's an amazing thing to have done. Amazing. Because at this point, he knows something is different about this entity, if you will, probably a better word for it. And he doesn't really ask him where he came from, what's part of it, or any of those things. He just needs to know whether he's going to fight for his army. At this point, Joshua's thinking it's his army. Or are you fighting for the Canaanites? Does he give him an answer? No. He doesn't give him an answer, does he? Or I guess you can call it an answer. What does he say? Neither. Neither. I'm not fighting for you or them. I am the commander of the Lord's army. And what does Joshua do? At this point, Joshua falls down and he worships him. Now, that certainly could be an angel. It's possible. It's possible to be several other things. But we know from the rest of the text that angels weren't worshipped. In fact, John tries it in Revelation 19 to fall down and worship an angel and says, "Stand up, I'm a servant just like you." We see people falling down in the 14th chapter of Acts and trying to worship Paul and Barnabas. No, we are servants like you. But what does this entity do? He acknowledges the worship. We see that when Moses does it in the 3rd chapter of Exodus. He eventually realizes that bush is representative of something far greater than a bush and a burning. He falls down and worships it. But at that point, God says, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. What does this entity say to Joshua? He falls down to the ground in reverence and asks him, well, before that, what message do you have? And what does he tell him to do? He doesn't start to tell him, I want you to go take Jericho, I'm going to do all those things. No, what is he telling him to do? Take off your sandals, for the place that you are standing on is holy. Think about that for a minute. And then remember that the Lord has said, and Jesus has said, I'm with you always. And Hebrews tells us that Jesus was before and after and etc. 13th chapter of Hebrews. This, to me at least, personifies God incarnate, because he is being worshipped. And Joshua realizes this. So we say, well, Jesus couldn't have come before and after. Yes, he could. He's a part of this. And Joshua says, you are the commander of the Lord's army. You are my commander. You deserve my worship. And he worships him. And what kind of message does he give him? I am in charge of the army. Not Joshua. I'm in charge of the army. I'm taking the army to Canaan and to Jericho. And he goes, and he tells us something else. Look at the 6th chapter and first couple of verses that we read before. This is before they attacked Jericho. I have given you Jericho, is what he tells them. Now, go out there and take a bunch of trumpets and the priest and the ark and marches around this thing 7 days, etc., etc. We're not going to get into any of that. You've seen it, read it. If you haven't, do it again. Take a look at the 6th chapter. My point here is that he has delivered Jericho into their hands. There's no question when Joshua goes there. He's not hoping to win this battle. He no longer is confronted with how big the walls are, or how thick that they are, or how difficult they're going to be. As far as he's concerned, God has said, I have delivered Jericho to you. There's no question in his mind. There's no question at all. Maybe when he sits down with his soldiers and says, okay, here's our plan for attack. We're going to put the ark out there with a couple of priests, and we're going to go around it. And you're going to stand around and wait for this to happen. If I'd been one of his generals, I'd wondered how much wine he was drinking from the Canaan availability. Just think about that for a minute. God has said, I have delivered Jericho and their walls to you. They're not going to be a difficulty. All you have to do is what I've told you to do. All you have to do is be prepared as a soldier, that you've been circumcised, that you have taken the Passover, that you've had the relationship with God, and that you're confident in God to have accomplished this task. That's what I want out of you, and I am leading your army. That's fantastic. That they go out there, and of course they take Jericho and accomplish that task, and the walls come crumbling down, and they end up obliterating everybody but Rahab and her family. It tells us something about our lives as well. That we've got Jerichos in our lives. That we have the walls that we put up by ourselves. That we look at anxiety, we look at financial issues, we look at pandemics, we worry about everything but what we should be worrying about. We should be worrying about our relationship with the God eternal. That we need to meet up with Jesus and say, you're my commander. You're my king. You're in charge. And when we do that, we can stand back and say, perhaps we can have joy in our lives. Jesus tells us that in the 10th chapter of John. I came that you might have life and have it to its fullest. When we're worried about whether we are the right kind of person or not, whether we're worrying about whether we can forgive other people or not, when we're worrying about whether they can forgive us, when we're worrying about our financial aspects, when we're worrying about our health, when we put everything else in front of there, we have built up the walls of Jericho. We have built them so high that perhaps we can't break them. No, we absolutely can't break them down. Only our commander can. And it's to him that we look at. It's to him that says, you are in charge of my life. And when we do that, when we've accepted that, then we know that God has delivered it to us. That we don't have to be concerned about that wall. That God is going to tear it down. That we're going to chase Satan out of our lives. That doesn't make it easy, but it makes it happen. I have delivered it to you. That's what he's telling us at this point. When we look at the walls of Jericho and we see God saying to Joshua, I have delivered that, he's saying the same thing to us in the 21st century. Whatever your difficulty is, whatever problems that you have, whatever pandemic that you think you may be going through, I have delivered it for you. That doesn't make it easy, but it says that with confidence you no longer have to be concentrating on that wall. Deepak, what was his last name? I've forgotten it right now. Has just put out a note, and he writes a lot of texts, and most of them are pretty good in terms of how we should be living our Sopra, Deepak Sopra, how we should be living our lives. He suggests that we ought to have a pandemic of joy. Instead of the pandemic that we're worrying about now, look at those things and say we need a pandemic of joy. Well, I think that's what Jesus is really saying to us in our lives, that we need a pandemic of joy. We need a pandemic of love. We need a pandemic of concern and relationship to one another. And if we do those things, then we can look at it and say, yeah, I can take on the Jerichos in my life. I'm able to accomplish the task that I need to be doing. I am, no matter how thick I think those walls are, I can accomplish that. Do we need to be ritually fit? Yeah. And what do I mean by that? Have we committed ourselves to Jesus? Have we really, truly deep down in and said, yeah, Jesus, you're my king. You are everything to me. And we believe that. We acknowledge it intellectually. I won't doubt that. If I ask any one of us, including myself, is Jesus in charge? Yeah, Jesus is in charge. Is God in charge? Yeah, God's in charge. Do I believe that? Yeah, I believe that. But when we go about our lives not showing it, then we not only have built up another wall for ourselves, but more importantly for those that are around us looking for answers. How can we tell them that Jesus is the answer when we're not acting like Jesus is the king? When we say to people and act to people that says my wall is too thick, that I'm worried more about my health, I'm worried more about my financials, I'm worried more about everything else in my life, how can we say to people we have an answer for that when they're not seeing it in our lives? They want to know that God has delivered Jericho to our lives, and then they want to sign up because people want those answers. The world at this point needs that pandemic of joy, and they want it. They just don't know whether we have the right answers for them or not. And the reason they don't know it is because we're not portraying it like we really believe it. We're not out there trying to say to them, we can take Canaan now. We're ready to go into Canaan. Oh, it won't be easy. We got battles to win. We'll think about Caleb. He was probably 85 when he told him that. There was a particular section that he was given and his people were given, and it was where the most difficult part of the army in Canaan was at. And he says, I can do it. This person was 85 years old. But Caleb was the type that says, yeah, I'm going to do it. But you know what? I'm going to do it with God's help. When we look at Canaans in our lives, and we think about all the difficulties that we have, and there are a lot of them. I'm not denying that they don't exist. I'm suggesting that between you and God, you are a majority. You and God can accomplish any of these things. Without God, it doesn't matter how big you are, or how much you're going to worry about it, or how much your financial gains are, or any of those things. You can't be successful. And so you have difficulties in life. But you and God, me and God, is a majority to all of Satan's problems. All of them. That's why he went to the cross. That's why we have an empty grave. That's why we can look at Jesus and say, I know that you are my king. And when Jesus tells them in Matthew in the 28th chapter, I'm going to be with you always. Always. And we think, well, he's somewhere up in heaven. Somehow we've messed up that horribly. Jesus is among us, is with us, is a part of us, and he is our king. And it is important to all of us that as we portray him, as we are his army, that we act like that we can take the Jerichos of life. It doesn't matter how thick those walls are. That's what's important. We leave the wilderness experience behind us. That is, those times where I didn't have that relationship with God, when I was an enemy of God, and we're now a part of God's people. We're fitness with God. That doesn't mean the next gym, and it doesn't mean that you walk out 10 miles a day or any of those things. It means how well are you being fitted with God? How many times have you looked at his word? How often are you sitting down and saying, God, I need help today? Or God, thank you for everything that you've given me today. As we think about our fitness for God, allow us to do that much more prayerful action. As Paul tells us in the 8th chapter of Romans, even when we don't know what to say because we're feeling this so badly, so toughly, so difficultly, the Holy Spirit helps us talk to God. We need to have a fitness with God. We need to be reading his word. We need to be having a prayer session with God. We need to be having the relationship with him that says, I know that you're in charge and all my problems you can handle. You can handle. We are in reality with a war, with the Jesus war. He knew that when he went to the cross and ended it, he shook Satan to no end. He stopped him, if you will. He knew that he didn't have victory. That eventually the victory is without a doubt going to belong to God. Theologians have a saying called realized eschatology. Fancy term. What it really means is that which is going to happen is finite, that it will happen, that it has happened, that you can count on it happening. Realized eschatology. That which is in the future is going to happen. We don't have to worry about it. The book of Revelation is all about God winning. When I was teaching Revelation a couple of different times, you only have to remember one thing from all the way through the 22nd chapter. God is going to win. And if you grab that aspect, then the rest of the Revelation is easy to understand. Oh, there's a few problems in between, but not difficult. God is going to win. He has delivered Jericho to us. Now go out there and do what I've said. That's what he's really saying. Joshua, take that army and march around there. But I have delivered it to you. Brothers and sisters, we need to take on the walls of Jericho. There's a quote I have here from an individual professor. He called it the last lecture. He eventually dies from that. He got pancreatic cancer and was diagnosed with it. And he writes this: the brick walls are there for a reason. The brick walls are not there to keep us out. The brick walls are to give us a chance to show how badly we want something. The Jericho walls were for Israel's benefit. Had nothing to do with the Canaanites. Israel, are you going to be a part of my army? And if you are, take the ark that has God's words in it and march around this place and believe that I'm going to destroy it. Believe that you have done it. Deuteronomy in the 8th chapter, 2nd and 3rd verse. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way through the wilderness in those 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had even known, to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Jesus quotes that to Satan at some point. When we look at that, we realize that God is king of our lives and that he's testing us. How badly do we want a relationship with the God of eternity? Would we rather tackle our own problems and face our own walls and say, yeah, I'm going to fix those myself, or whether we have God in charge and says, despite those problems, you are my king? That's the question we have to ask ourselves today. Is God our king? Is he our commander? Joshua ran into him in the minute he realized that he no longer was going to be leading this, but the commander of the Lord was going to be leading this. He says, all right. And he steps back. What do you want me to do? That's his first question to him. I understand you're the commander. What is it you want me to do? We ought to be asking ourselves that question. Lord, what is it you want me to do? And what does Jesus tell his disciples? 28th chapter, 8 verses 18, 19. Go about making disciples, teaching them everything that I've given you, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's what we want to be doing. And no matter what walls we face, if we accomplish that task, then we are doing what God wants to do, and we've got this eternal relationship. We're going to sing an invitation song in a minute. If you got questions, ask me. If you got ideas, come back at me. But whatever we do, let's realize that we are God's army, and it's not a children's song. It is one in which I mean it, that I am his and his alone. And that's what he expects out of me. That's what he tells me to do. That's what he's telling you to do. That's why he's reaching out to our hearts and saying, go challenge those walls because I have delivered them to you. Let's sing our song.